Hi, thank you for your interest in my talk. I'm Giulia and today I'm going to talk about blurry vision or seeing blurrily and whether we can have a very simple, minimal account of this phenomenon that doesn't make any sort of controversial commitments and yet still explains what we want to explain. After contrasting the minimal approach with some alternatives in the literature, I'm going to ask why this minimal explanation has not been seriously considered or has been disregarded so far. I would suggest that this is because this explanation doesn't respect a certain assumption that one might make about the form that explanations of the way things look to one in general need to take. And then I'm going to conclude by pointing out that we don't seem to have good reasons to assume that explanations need to take that form, and that in particular it doesn't seem to be required in order to account for certain perceptual phenomena. To get us started, let's focus on a specific case, the eye chart scenario. So we have a subject, Norma, looking at an eye chart in an ophthalmologist's studio. The eye chart contains letters of varying sizes, growing smaller and smaller as we go down the eye chart. Norma looks at the eye chart and reports on what letters she sees. She reports them correctly and easily for most of the length of the eye chart. Then perhaps line 6 or 7 she starts to struggle and she's not quite sure, she makes some mistakes, and then the last 2 lines she says she can't tell what shapes are there and she's merely guessing. By contrast, her friend Shorty starts having trouble reporting the letters earlier on in the eye chart. It looks at the letters and doesn't make mistakes for 3 or 4 lines, then starts squinting his eyes, tries to move his head closer to the eye chart, reports struggling, makes a lot of mistakes, and then perhaps by line 6 or 7 he has no idea what letters are there and reports he is merely guessing. Now the ophthalmologist is going to tell him that he needs to wear corrective lenses because he is short-sighted, while Norma is normally sighted and doesn't need to wear any glasses at all. While we were focusing on Norma's and Shorty's discriminatory performance here, it's clear that the eye chart looks different to Norma than it does to Shorty. In particular, if we focus on the E in the 3rd row, the E looks blurry to Shorty but doesn't look blurry to Norma. We can ask, what explains the difference in how things look to them? Well, we have said that the eye chart is the very same eye chart, and we can suppose that Norma and Shorty looks at it from the very same distance and the very same point of view. So what is it that explains why the E in particular looks different to them? Well, there is a very simple explanation here. We know that there is a difference between Norma and Shorty. Norma is normally sighted and Shorty is short-sighted. So the visual sensitivity differs. Visual sensitivity to which visible properties exactly is a matter of empirical investigation, but I'm going to assume that visual sensitivity to shape and location properties is what is making the difference here. So Shorty has comparatively lower sensitivity to shape and location properties, and that's why the letters on the eye chart look different to them than they do to Norma. While we don't have to commit to a specific theory of what visual sensitivity is, we can take it to be a property of subjects that is determined by features of the visual system and that allows us to account for their discriminatory performance in a range of conditions, their judgments, their reports about the way things look and about what sorts of shapes and sizes and locations they're seeing. Now, the sensitivity view makes very minimal commitments because everyone agrees that subjects have visual sensitivity. It's a property that we are already committed to, not only independently of the issue of accounting for blurry vision, but independently of accounting for the way things look to us in general. And we can establish whether subjects differ in their visual sensitivity quite independently of how things look to them and how they report them as looking. which is what the ophthalmologist was doing. Moreover, if we appeal to a difference in sensitivity in the eye chart scenario, differences in sensitivity might explain differences in how things look in other cases where one sees blurrily, although this is not due to short-sightedness. Consider, for instance, a subject that after a blow to the head is feeling lightheaded and things look very blurry to them. What might have happened here is the incident has temporarily impaired the normal visual sensitivity to shape and location properties. And this difference to their normal sensitivity explains why things look different to them before and after the lightheadedness. We can see how the view makes very minimal commitments by briefly comparing it to some other alternatives in the literature. So one option in the literature is to consider blurry vision as an illusory experience where things seem to be fuzzy or to have fuzzy boundaries, although they do not have them. So when something looks blurry, it looks to be fuzzy, even though it is not. And this has the consequence that seeing blurrily is an illusion. Or one might think that seeing blurrily involves the genuine perception of some apparent shapes, where these are experience-dependent or subject-dependent properties distinct from normal objective shapes. Another option that's been defended is appealing to qualitative properties of experience. The blurriness of blurry vision is not due to what one sees, it's due to some properties of one's experience, some spatial blurriness qualia that characterize experiences where one sees blurrily and set them apart from experiences where one sees clearly. Alternatively, one might appeal to modes of experience or ways of experience, where these are also properties of experience that can distinguish between seeing blurrily, where there is a blurry mode, and seeing clearly, where there is a clear or non-blurry mode of seeing. Now, appealing to blurriness involving an illusion to appearance properties, qualitative properties of experience, or modes of experiencing might be controversial commitments. What matters to me is just that the sensitivity view doesn't make any of these commitments and is therefore simpler and more minimal. Now, one might think at this point the sensitivity view is just too minimal. It's not telling us enough, it's not giving us an explanation of the way things look to Shorty when Shorty sees blurrily. In order to see where this worry is coming from, we need to look at another feature that distinguishes the sensitivity view from alternatives in the literature. This is a structural difference. On alternative accounts of blurry vision, such as the one we mentioned before, the fact that things look blurry to one rather than not blurry is explained by a certain property, whether this is a property one experiences, such as a fuzzy shape or an apparent shape, or is a property of one's experience, such as a qualitative property or a mode of seeing. There is a distinctive property that explains the blurry aspect of one's experience. But on the sensitivity view, there is no such distinctive property that is there in blurry experiences and absent in non-blurry ones. So I take it everyone would agree that the overall way that things look to Shorty when it looks at the eye charts is not explained by a single property, be it a mode, an apparent property, a quality of Shorty's experience. It's a bunch of factors that explains the overall way that things look to Shorty. It matters what source of sensitivity it has on the sensitivity view. It matters which objects Shorty is seeing, which conditions of perception, the distance, for instance, from the eye chart, whether there's any intervening media. And the sensitivity view is no different from alternatives in this respect. But less obviously on the sensitivity view, unlike on alternative approaches, that things look blurry to someone rather than not blurry is also not explained by one single property, So one might think, well, sensitivity is explaining why things look blurry to Shorty. They are limited or comparatively limited visual sensitivity to shape. But actually that's a mistake. What sensitivity explains in the eyeshot scenario is just that things look different to Shorty than they do to Norma. And that's because we were supposing that all other factors, except for their visual sensitivity, were being held fixed. But that things look blurry to Shorty doesn't just depend on Shorty's comparatively limited visual sensitivity. It also depends on what sorts of objects and properties he's seeing. If Shorty was looking at much bigger, much larger size letters, maybe they wouldn't look so blurry to him. Or if he was very close to them, they wouldn't look as blurry. But the conditions of perception also matter. Consider Norma's experience, keeping our sensitivity fixed and keeping the objects of perception fixed. If Norma was very far away from the eyeshot might look blurry to her, or blurrier than it would otherwise look if she was closer. And what sort of intermediate media are there also makes a difference, whether one is wearing corrective lenses or whether one is wearing distorting lenses, or whether there is a semi-transparent window pane in between the subject and the eyeshot might make a difference as to whether the eyeshot looks blurry or more or less blurry to one. Now, given this, one might be dissatisfied with the sort of explanation the sensitivity view is giving. If one thinks that the explanation in general of the way things look to one needs to have a certain form, one would find that the structural difference that we just discussed makes the sensitivity view dissatisfying. So for each aspect of the way things look to one might think, there is a distinct property that matches that aspect and explains it. For instance, for the blurry aspect of one's experience, there is a distinct property, the mode of seeing, that matches that aspect. And if the mode is blurry, then one's experience will have the blurry aspect. And if the mode is a clear mode of seeing, then one's experience is not going to have the blurry aspect. And as we said, the sensitivity view doesn't respect this form, for there is only a conjunction of factors that in each case explains whether things look blurry to one and how blurry they look. And indeed, the very same factors that we have appealed to for the case of Norma and Shorty might explain the blurry aspect of one's experience in other scenarios where things look blurry to one, but this is not because of one's comparatively reduced visual sensitivity. For instance, if one is looking through mist or through a semi-transparent pane, if one is looking at the surface of water or at watercolor patches, or if one is seeing some fuzzy objects such as ducklings or certain fuzzy plants. In all these cases, things might look somewhat blurry to one. In fact, they might even look the same if we were to design the scenarios so that contextual cues aren't available to the subject and we can't tell whether the blurry aspect is due to something about us or what we are seeing or the conditions of perception. And yet, there may not be anything in common metaphysically across these experiences where things look blurry, no shared metaphysical structure, and not even a shared component that explains the blurry aspect in all cases. So again, we go for a pluralism concerning the explanation of how things look. Just as in the case of blurry vision, we don't need to make any controversial commitments, as a very minimal explanation seems to be enough. So is the case of other cases where things look blurry that are not due to differences in one's sensitivity to shape. What I hope we have learned from considering this particular case is that commitments that move beyond very minimal explanations of certain perceptual phenomena might be motivated by an implicit conception of the sort of explanation that we need to give of the way things look to one. If we think that the explanation needs to be such that for each aspect of the way things look, there is a property, distinct property that explains and matches, so to speak, that aspect, then we might need to make further commitments and move beyond commitments that we already have independently of explaining those phenomena. But this implicit assumption concerning the form that explanations need to take needs further argument, and it's not clear that we should accept it. In particular, this is not required in order to account for those perceptual phenomena. I hope that the talk was interesting, and as it is a work in progress, I welcome any comments, questions, and objections. Thanks.